Many people ask me questions about Stoic philosophy and practice. I've created this series to provide short answers to the most common, recurring, or confusing questions about Stoicism. Does Stoicism require repressing one's emotions? This is a great question because it's so reflective of a major misunderstanding, a very widespread one, of what it is that Stoic philosophy has as its basis and what it's advocating and what the goal or endpoint of practicing Stoicism is supposed to be. Now, if you're the sort of person who wants a quick, straightforward, simple answer, the answer to this question is no. Stoicism does not require repressing one's emotions. That's probably not that satisfying of an answer because you might say, but I heard that it did. Or it seems from the things that I've read that that's what one ought to do. So we want to look at what Stoicism actually tells us about the emotions. First, though, I think it's very useful to make a distinction between lowercase s Stoicism, which is a character trait or disposition of toughness, oftentimes involving repressing emotions, not dealing with them, not acknowledging them. That's not what we're talking about here as uppercase S Stoicism, the philosophy and set of practices that go all the way back to ancient times. Let's start by looking at what the Stoics have to say about emotions in general. And there's a prevalent misunderstanding of them that says that the Stoics thought all the emotions were bad. You can see people repeating this in histories of philosophy, in interpretations of Stoicism, and that's actually incorrect. If we look at what the Stoics did have to say about emotions, they thought that many of our emotional responses are in fact bad, they're negative, they don't help us, they actually are disturbances of the soul, or if you prefer a different term, the personality or the mind. But the Stoics also thought that there are some emotional responses that are not just neutral, but are in fact good for us to have. They called these the eupatheiai, and those would be things like rational amount of fear, what they called caution, eulabeia, rational desire, boulesis. And they didn't talk about grief or pain in that way, but they did talk about a rational type of pleasure, sort of joy is the way that we can translate that. Notice that I'm using the term rational in all of those. This doesn't mean that we have to be totally in our head and detached from our emotional life. What it means is that there are certain limits or orientations or guidelines given by our rational faculty to how and why we're feeling the way that we are. So the Stoics think that we should be joyful about some things. We should be cautious about some things. We should, in fact, feel confidence in some cases. We should, in fact, have desires. Now, that doesn't mean that every single joy or pleasure is automatically good, but they did distinguish that entire range. Some of the others that they do talk about are what we might call attachment or familial affection, philostorgia. Marcus will talk quite often about all sorts of other emotions, as so will Seneca. Many of them will use the term love. And in fact, the Stoics did not think that all love is necessarily pathological either. So there's a wide range of emotions that a Stoic wouldn't repress, even if the Stoics were into repressing emotions. That leaves open, of course, the question, well, what about those bad emotions? Shouldn't we just repress those? And the Stoics would say, probably not, because when you just repress, you push down an emotion. You try to, submerge it below the level of your consciousness, or you resist it and you won't give in to it. you're not actually improving yourself. You are just taking a stand. It could be good if you're, finding yourself very angry to not say that thing that you want to say, but that's not repressing the emotion. That's just not acting on that emotion. To repress the emotions means to tell yourself, I'm not going to feel this, or I'm not feeling it, and you tell yourself that enough until you actually believe that you're not angry, afraid, sad, whatever it happens to be. This is not a productive way to approach things, because if you do that, you're not changing anything about the environment that is having you feel that way. You're not gaining any insight about why your response to those triggers, stressors, events is causing you to feel that emotion. So it's going to keep on happening over and over and over again, and you're going to find yourself having to repress it even more, and then it can become a bad habit that becomes quite difficult to break. So that's one big reason why it's not helpful, but it also tends to deform you. The idea behind Stoic philosophy is self-knowledge. We want to understand what's going on in our damaged, screwed up selves so that we can selectively start to work on things and fix it. If I find that I'm really struggling with anger, it's not going to do me any good to repress it. I need to know why I'm angry, when I'm getting angry, what it is that I'm getting angry over. I need to look at my reactions and be honest with myself. Perhaps even bring in a coach to get somebody else to give me some honesty. Only then can I begin to work on those emotions so that I will feel them less or less often or less intensely, or perhaps not even feel them at all. That's what Stoicism is suggesting in terms of the disturbing emotions. So it's clear that we don't want to repress emotions in Stoicism. Where might you go if you want to learn more about the Stoics and emotion? Well, there's classical sources, and I would actually direct you to Cicero's Tusculan Disputations, to Diogenes Laertes' Lives of the Philosophers, Book 7, Chapter 1, about Zeno and the doctrines of the Stoics, and to Arius Didymus's Epitome of Stoic Ethics. I would also read around in Seneca, in Epictetus, and in Marcus Aurelius, and you're going to find lots of great discussions. Seneca, in fact, has an entire book on anger, which could be very helpful for you to read. And there happens to be one excellent contemporary work by a scholar on this very topic. It's Margaret Graver and her Stoicism and Emotion. It's a somewhat difficult book. It's written for an academic audience, but it's pretty readable, and she is dead on in her analyses of the Stoics in their discussions of emotion. If you found this answer helpful for you, then please share it with others who might benefit from it. This work is entirely supported by crowdfunding on my Patreon site. So if you find it valuable, consider becoming a supporter at patreon.com/Sadler.